Right, right. All right, well, Shabbat Shalom. Good to see everybody. I think it's been about a month since I was last here, so not too long ago, but Howard was over at our house a few weeks ago. He said, "What are you doing the weekend of this weekend, Labor Day weekend?" I'm like, "Well, I'm not laboring anywhere, so I'll be here." And he said he had the men's retreat, so hopefully the men are getting a treat at the retreat. Bad humor starts a message. That's not the way to go. Okay, well, why don't we have a word of prayer? Lord, thank you for this time. Thank you, God, for the opportunity to be here. We pray, God, that each and every person would just be open to you, receiving from you today. It's all about you speaking to them. It's about you doing a work in their hearts through the Ruach, and we just commit this time to you. Lord, we just thank you, though, for this day, and it is a nice, cool day, and thank you, God, for the opportunity to be here. In Yeshua's name, amen. All right, well, just a few things. Howard, before I get into the main bulk of the message, Howard wanted me to talk a little bit, just take a few minutes to kind of talk a little bit about what's going on campuses in Columbus, which is basically the Ohio State University, and what we're doing there, what God's doing there. He asked me specifically to say something, so I'm going to do what he said. So anyway, I'm going to do exactly what he said to do. So I just want to mention a little bit about what's going on. So we've been doing campus ministry for almost 20 years now. I had the opportunity 20 years ago to go to the elders and tell them that we had already had a Bible study for years on campus with Beth Messiah. We'd had a presence on Ohio State for forever. And Seth Klayman led it at the time, and then he graduated and moved on, and then I went to the elders and I said, I kind of like to take a shot at that somehow, go down there and do some evangelism outreach, just talk to students. And so I started doing that a couple days a week while I was working another job. And then eventually I went full time, and I've been doing it for many, many years now. And Beth Messiah has, of course, been partnering with me in that effort for years. So I certainly appreciate that. But I just want to mention what's happening really on campuses, at least the Ohio State University, and we also do an outreach at Columbus State Community College, but mostly at Ohio State. But we have really seen the last few years, we have been seeing a move of God. For years, it was kind of like going down there, I was like, it seems like all I do is talk to people. They're kind of hardened and skeptical, and it's discouraging. But I'd say over the last 4 years, especially this new term, we've been seeing a really move of God. And so we're seeing a lot of people come to faith, and the consensus is across the campus, talking to a lot of people in different ministries, that it's happening everywhere. And we see a lot of people interested in the things of God. We see a lot of people asking questions, a lot of people very, very open, Jewish people, non-Jewish people, different cultures, because God brings the nations to Ohio State, and we have all these different nationalities, kind of like Columbus. I mean, God's bringing all the nations to Columbus as well. So we have been seeing a real move of God. And this is just some pictures of us out talking to people and, quizzing them on 100,000 questions, and them quizzing us. And then recently, perhaps you heard that, maybe heard about what happened with the Ohio State football players. So they did an outreach last Sunday on campus. I couldn't be there. I was out of town, but some of our students in our group went. And they did this, gave their testimony, talked about the good news, challenged people. And they saw a lot of people come to faith, and they did immersions there right on the spot. And so I guess some of these players, some of them could have gone to the NFL, but they stayed back to go to Ohio State another year, and also because they wanted to do more ministry and be a light there. So there's a very large portion of the football team that's really, really on fire for God. And so I guess they're really being outspoken about it. So that's really cool. And so God is doing amazing things. Now, when I say revival, like revival going on, it isn't just people coming to faith. It's believers themselves really excited about what God's doing in their life. They're passionate. We had a guy yesterday walk up to us, and he said, I am passionate about my faith. He said, I want to talk about it. He said, I am so passionate, and here's why. I'm like, okay. Let's hear it. So, okay, but we're seeing a lot of that. So it's really great. And so we're thankful that God is doing a mighty work on the college campuses. So thank you for your prayers. I know many people pray but we've seen a lot of people come to faith already these last few weeks, and we're just, really happy and blessed to be participating in what God is doing, because God is doing a work, okay? And by the way, Columbus, there's something that's about Columbus. God's doing a big work in Columbus. I talked to a lot of people across the city. There seems to be a lot of spiritual interest from a lot of people. So just remember, Beth Messiah is in a strategic location, and Columbus is a huge city. It's growing. So I believe God will just keep bringing new people here, and just, so it's exciting what God is doing, okay? So today I want to talk a little bit about cultural sayings, and most of you know when you hear my messages, it sounds like it's stuff I'm hearing on campus, which it is kind of, but it's out in the culture as well. But we want to talk a little bit today about culture and cultural sayings. Now, when we think of culture, it's interesting that believers for decades and decades, like the body of believers, have always struggled a bit on how to engage culture. Like, what do we do with culture? I mean, should we withdraw from culture? It's evil. Should we fully engage it? What should we do? And should we get involved in the culture wars and all that stuff? And there's some people we know, probably big names out there on the front lines, all the time, engaging the big cultural issues. But culture is just something, it's simply what we do with what God has made, because culture is certainly something that God gives us. It's a gift from God. So we're all in the culture. I mean, there's no doubt about it. We all are part of culture, and it's not something to be feared, but it's part of the goodness of creation. And of course, many people live in different cultures, but here we are in Columbus, Ohio, and we're part of the broader culture of the nation and the world, of course. So, but, when we think of culture, there's a book that came out a ways back by a guy named Charles Taylor. I don't know if he's still around, but he wrote a great book called The Secular Age, and he really dissected culture, like what's going on in culture, all the different viewpoints. And he wrote this book called A Secular Age. And basically he said, yes, we live kind of in a secular age where people are not as religious as they used to be. There's maybe not as, people are seeking spirituality. But in the midst of it, despite all the maybe the godlessness, whatever you want to call it, there are people that are still yearning for transcendence. They're looking for meaning and purpose in the midst of all the secular features of culture, okay? Now I can't go over the entire book, you'd have to get it, but it is a fantastic book. But anyway, in the midst of it, though, he's saying that people are still seeking. Now, when we come to talk about culture, different definitions of culture, I think most of us probably are familiar with pop culture, right? And we're all part of pop culture. Pop culture influences all of us. It's the entertainment industry, it's the sports industry, it has to do with fashion and movies and music, and all of us have been somehow influenced by pop culture. We still are, okay? It can be fickle and faddish. Things change all the time within pop culture. And, when you think of the 90s, I was already in my 20s by then, mid-20s, and, I remember some of the things from the 90s seemed so long ago, right? It was 1994, I became a believer. So from 94 on, my whole life changed after that. But, some of the things that were going on during the 90s, we remember pop culture maybe. Some of you are like, I don't know any of that stuff. What is that? But then if you're like me and Jeff and others in here, you're an 80s guy. Come on. We graduated in the 80s, and MTV was around, and watched way too much MTV. Oh, my goodness. My mom's like, turn it off. But, we're all part of 80s pop culture, right? Boy, think of all those things in the 80s. And, of course, the greatest movie of all time came out during the 80s, which Jeff and I concur, Back to the Future. And we talk about it to this day. I text him, I'm like, I got a picture here of something from Back to the Future. He sends me one, so. But anyway, and then some of us in here, like me, I'm also, I was young then, but it's all 70s, right? And we know that what defines the 70s pop culture is the Brady Bunch. So, Marsha. And you can't get away from the Brady Bunch in the 70s. So, but all of us have been influenced by pop culture in some way, okay? But then we move on to what's called high culture, okay? High culture has to do more with the opera and the arts and ballet and classical music. My parents are big classical music fans. They went to the symphony and stuff. My dad was a fundraiser for the symphony, but A lot of sophisticated issues, things like that, and some of us maybe have partaken, maybe been part of that, or we still do, partake in some of these things. And then we have what's called folk culture. And folk culture just has to do more with the rituals and traditions to maintain a group identity. I personally have no background in folk culture of any kind. So, because I'm just boring, okay? My family was not we're not ethnic. We don't have anything. I mean, my name's French, Chabot, but it's not like we have French things in our house and celebrate French culture, French-Canadian culture. I have no idea. But, of course, in Judaism, of course, there's a lot more of that in other cultures. So I appreciate that, but I just have nothing to tell as far as folk cultures. So I go to festivals. I like festivals. I'll go to different cultural festivals. They're cool, but I'm not personally Irish or Macedonian or Italian or anything. My wife's Italian, though, so that's good. Anyway, but today we have something that we're all part of, and which is tied in with the culture, which is called the zeitgeist, okay? If you're not familiar with this word, this means just like, the zeitgeist is just like the spirit of the age we live in, okay? It's a characteristic of a certain age or generation. It's part of the air we breathe, part of the culture we live in, okay? We're all part of that, okay? And of course, this changes all the time, right? I mean, things change within the spirit of the age. 1 minute it's this, 1 minute it's that, and we see that all the time with social media and everything. But I thought what I'd do today is maybe go over some of the common sayings that are part of the spirit of the age today that we live in, okay, and how to respond to them biblically, okay, and hopefully maybe we can avoid falling into some of these traps ourselves. And as some of us are raising children or young people, we know that they're going to hear these things, and they are hearing these things as well. So perhaps this will help, okay? So let's talk about the first one, and one of the most popular ones. Just follow your heart, right? Isn't that common today? We need to just follow our hearts. What does your heart say? Okay, that is one of the most common sayings of our culture. Perhaps our children come to us and ask us for wisdom about a decision, and we say to them, what does your heart say? What does your heart tell you? Or we go to friends or, even as adults, we say that, what is your heart telling you? What does your heart say? I understand what people are saying, but when it comes to like this, like Celine Dion, which has the most fabulous voices of all time, but when she says, if you do follow your heart, I don't think you can go wrong. That's just not true, as we know. Biblically, that is just not true, okay? So there's no doubt in the spirit of the age, there's a big emphasis on following your heart. Now, there was a book that came out a ways back, I think about 6 or 7 years ago. It was a book called Good Faith. Being a Christian when society thinks you're irrelevant and extreme. And the authors did some research, and they came with some of these conclusions. They said here that 84% of Americans believe that enjoying yourself is the highest goal of life. They said 86% believe that to enjoy yourself, you must pursue the things you desire most. And then 91% affirm the statement to find yourself, look within yourself, right? And so that goes along with what I'm talking about, following your heart, the spirit of the age. Now, what do we mean, though, when we say follow your heart? Just follow your heart. What do we mean? I think that mostly when people say that, they're assuming that we're telling people that you need to trust yourself, right? You are the starting point, okay? You make your own judgments to determine if something is right or wrong. Or you just start by whatever feels right deep down, right inwardly. It's based on mostly your emotions or desires or instincts, right? And if you feel it, it must be right. I mean, it just you got that feeling. It's the right thing to do. My heart tells me this. My heart tells me that, right? I think that's generally where we are when we talk about following your heart. A lot of people start inwardly, right? Right away start with the desires, right? We have. That's a challenge, of course, because I think we all know that our hearts are in a constant state of flux, right? 1 minute we desire one thing, 1 minute we desire the next thing. Things are shifting all the time. Our hearts are always changing. So there's a real challenge with that, okay? And I think that what we need to do is remember that first and foremost, that what God says is true, right, about us is infinitely more trustworthy than whatever your fallen feelings may say from one moment to the next, okay? Let me repeat that. What God says is true about you is infinitely more trustworthy than whatever your fallen feelings may say from one moment to the next, all right? Now, there's another challenge about following our hearts. Of course, we can fall in the trap, or the culture falls in the trap of just being self-absorbed, right? And what happens is the more self-absorbed we are, the less awe we experience, and I'll explain what I mean. The less awe we experience, the less fully and freely ourselves we become. Now, when I say awe, I don't mean like, aw shucks. What I mean is awe, a feeling of respect or reverence mixed with dread and wonder, often inspired by something majestic or powerful, okay? Now, did you know this? This is fascinating. Did you know that more than 35,000 people a year make the trek to Mount Everest, 4.5 million visit the Grand Canyon, and 30 million to Niagara Falls? Did you know that? And do you know why that is, why people flock to these places? And other parts of the world, by the way, they're even incredible, more awesome. You know what they're looking for? They're looking for awe. See? They're looking for something larger than themselves. They're trying to get out of the self-absorption. They're saying, "What? There's something bigger there that I need to partake in." And when they travel to these places, it just hits them, right? They're looking for that. And that's fascinating. So it just shows you that God has put that within us, that we need this, okay? We need to look at his creation. I mean, my dad, who's not even a believer in Messiah, would look at certain parts of the world. He said, "The beauty of God's creation, look at that." I'm like, "Dad, do you follow him?" He's like, "Well, I don't know about that." But, what about Yeshua? I don't know about that. But some people just, it hits them. So people crave awe, okay? And that's because they get tired of just following their own hearts. Now, another challenge, of course, is that the challenge to following your heart is that we forget our hearts are very depraved, okay? That we have an issue of moral depravity. And if you want to see that on display, just turn on the news, right? Look at the news on a daily basis. It's quite depressing, right? So you should probably stay off there sometimes. Take a break. And then we quote the famous passage out of Jeremiah. This is what we call a proof text, right? That's where we take a passage out of the chapter or verse and we look at it, but we got to go back to the context, read it in the rest of the book, how it fits in the context of the rest of the book, but I don't have time to do that. But it says in Jeremiah 17:9-10, "The heart is deceitful above all things and incurable. Who can know it? I, Adonai, search the heart. I try the mind to give every man according to his ways, according to the fruit of his deeds." Now, this passage, of course, is in the context of Judah's sinfulness, right? In spite of all the blessings of God, they're sinning, and God is not happy with that. But that is a good text, a good little text to test us. The heart is deceitful above all things, right? And God has to test our hearts continuously. And we have a couple other passages that are similar to that. A passage out of Ecclesiastes that says, a verse out of Ecclesiastes that says, "This is a misery in everything done under the sun, that the same destiny awaits everyone. Moreover, the hearts of all humans are full of evil, and folly is in their hearts during their lives after they die." Then, of course, Proverbs 28:26, "Whoever trusts in his own heart is a fool, but he who walks in wisdom will escape," right? And then we have Yeshua that said something very profound as well in Matthew 15. He says, "But these things that come out of the person's heart come from the heart. Person's mouth come out of the heart, and these defile them. For out of the heart comes evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. These are what defile a person, but eating with unwashed hands does not defile them." Okay? So, I don't know if you guys have ever read the book Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. It was one of the first 2 or 3 books I read as a new believer. Of course, the Bible was first, but as I had a little stack of a few books, Mere Christianity had a huge influence on me. But Lewis had this great quote in the book Mere Christianity. He said, "Surrender to all our desires obviously leads to impotence, disease, jealousies, lies, concealment, and everything that is in the reverse of health, good humor, and frankness. For any happiness, even in this world, quite a lot of restraint is going to be necessary. And isn't it true in this world, to be successful, you have to have some restraint, right? To do anything well, you've got to show some restraint. You've got to learn restraint, right? Okay. Now, we talk about the Bible. When we think about the heart, we're talking about really the totality of who we are, right? You guys, we say the Shema every week, and we do mention the heart, and that is everything we have. Our emotions, our thoughts, our choices, actions, it all goes together. It's holistic. It's one package, right? It's everything, okay? It's not just like a part of us, like our inward desires. It's everything, okay? And so what I think is that it's fascinating that God knew, as he started to read the Torah, you see that he realizes that people are going to need a heart transplant, of course, and the Messiah will be the donor. And this starts way back in Deuteronomy. Do you notice towards the end of Moses' life that God tells Moses that something is going to be coming? Now, they have the written Torah, which is awesome, but now he's saying something's coming that's going to be even better. It says here in Deuteronomy 29, it says, Moses called to all Israel and said to them, you have seen all that Adonai did before your eyes in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and all his servants and all his land, the great trials that our eyes saw, those great signs and wonders. But to this day, Adonai has not given you a heart to know, or eyes to see, or ears to hear. I led you 40 years in the wilderness. Your clothes have not worn out on you, and your sandals have not worn out on your feet. But bread you have not eaten, and wine and strong drink you have not drunk, in order you may know that I am Adonai your God. Notice he tells Moses, I've not given you a heart to know, or eyes to see, or ears to hear yet. Okay, there's something coming. It's coming, it's coming. And then he says in Deuteronomy 30, next chapter over, it says, Adonai your God will bring you into the land that your fathers possessed, and you will possess it. And he will do you good and multiply you more than your fathers. Also Adonai will circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your descendants to love Adonai your God with all your heart and with all your soul, in order that you may live. So here we have it. God's telling them, Adonai's telling them that I'm going to circumcise your hearts. So where's that coming? Where's it coming? Where's it pointing to? We're going right into Jeremiah 31, okay? The one passage that actually mentions the phrase new covenant. We don't see that phrase a lot in the Tanakh, like the actual phrase new covenant. And here we are with the two kingdoms are divided. The northern and southern kingdoms are split apart. And God tells them, I'm going to reunite them under one covenant. And what's he say here? He says, behold, days are coming. It's a declaration of Adonai, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not like the covenant I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. For they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them. It is a declaration of Adonai. But this is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after those days. It is a declaration of Adonai. I'll put my Torah within them. Yes, I'll write it on their heart. I will be their God. They will be my people. No longer will each teach his neighbor or each his brother, saying, know Adonai, for they will all know me. From the least of them to the greatest is a declaration to Adonai, and I will forgive their iniquity. Their sin I will remember no more. Similar passage like this, kind of similar in Ezekiel 36. We're probably familiar with that. Israel is in exile, right? And God tells them he's going to bring them back to the land. He says, I'll take you out of the nations. I'll gather you from these countries and bring you back into your land. I'll sprinkle you with clean water on you. You will be clean. I'll cleanse you from all impurities, from your idols. I'll give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I'll remove from you a heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. Now, you notice in Jeremiah, this passage and the passage in Ezekiel, these are new covenant passages, talking about the new covenant. There's no mention of Gentiles here in either one of these passages. They're not even written to Gentiles, really, in the original context. So you may be saying, but I'm a new covenant believer. I'm a Gentile believer, and I believe in the new covenant. But where do we fit in here as Gentiles? Well, that's why you need to read Romans 11, because Paul says we're grafted in, right? And so we get to partake of the new covenant. But its original context, it's written to the Jewish people, right? And it's in the land, okay? They're in the land, okay? As far as being regathered to the land, they're in the land. So I always find this fascinating when every once in a while I get a teacher class in a church and I talk about these passages. And I love it when I ask, believers about this, where are we in this as non-Jewish people? And So then I go to Romans 11, and then we explain it. But anyway, it's fascinating. Okay, and so, and then we have the passage, one of our favorite passages in Proverbs 3, 5-8. It says, trust in Adonai with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes, fear Adonai, and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your body and refreshment to your bones. So what are we talking about there? Well, in Proverbs 3, 5-8, of course, we're talking about we need to trust in the Lord with all our heart, and we must fully rely upon God's wisdom, promises, everything, right? And that's what we have to do every day. Trust in him with all our heart. It's not always easy because humans and all of us are tainted by sin, limited wisdom, of course, impulsive assumptions, all those things. But that's what God asks us to do, to trust in him with all our heart. And we have to learn that, of course, over time. That's a process, right? But, you know, the reality of it is, and people pursue their own heart, and they're constantly trying to just follow their own heart, is that, as I said, their hearts are in flux, is that they're looking to things that are always changing. You know, if your heart is, you're just following your heart in some of these areas, like you're relying on these things to define you or whatever it is, you're looking at these things to fulfill you. We all know that our health, our career, our vocation, our possessions, our relationships, our abilities, and of course politics, no doubt about it, and culture is just shifting nonstop. It's always changing. It has limits, right? Always having limits, okay? So what people are really looking for in reality is they're looking for the infinite, okay? They're looking for something that has no limits. And the only one who can provide that is God. He's the only person being without limits, okay? And that's what we talk about when we say like God's infinity. And I know you guys take classes here all the time on the attributes of God, right? You're just having a systematic theology class the next week, right, on the attributes of God. It's playing around there. Anyway, but we talk about God's infinity. Being an infinite means he's limitless, okay? He's without boundaries. God is not limited by time, space, health problems, anything. He is limitless, okay? And that's where we can find our true joy in him. Now, what about people, though, that say sometimes if they think, well, you know, if I follow my heart, that means I'm totally free. You know, I'm following my heart and I'm totally free. And you guys are putting all these restraints on me and constraints on me, and I want to do my own thing. I just want to follow my heart. Well, you're not really free, to be honest. You're not free, okay? Because freedom from sin does not yield autonomy, but devotion to a different master, okay? You're always serving something, okay? It's not the Lord. You're picking something else, okay? So the question becomes, who is your master? Because, you know, God, the Bible's not against freedom. It's really not, okay? It's just freedom is to follow God in his ways, the way he's designed us, and God is good. He's put a design plan in place, and if we follow that plan, it generally goes pretty well, okay? So God's not against freedom, but the Bible is against full autonomy for sure, right? But it's not against freedom. So people sometimes misunderstand that. Now, the passage that we repeat so many times in Mark 12, 29 to 31, when Yeshua says here the greatest commandments, to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, and mind, all our being, all our strength, everything. That is a good antidote to the culture that says just follow your heart, okay? Because what we want to do is stress that loving God with all our heart means that we are not just loving God with our emotions or our feelings. We're loving God with everything, right? And we think about loving God with all our heart. The mind of the heart includes what we know, right? When we talk about our thinking, our ideas, that includes our intellect, right? The desires of the heart, of course, have to do with, you know, what we yearn for, what we seek, what we want. But then we have the will of the heart as well, right? What we choose, right? The things we choose. You see, all these things go together when we talk about loving God with all our heart, whereas the culture just says start with probably the middle part, right? Just start with inwardly, start with the feelings and the desires. But we have a better model to follow, okay? And so that's what we want to emphasize as far as just following your heart, is follow your heart the way Yeshua teaches it, with all our being, okay, everything. Now, another cultural saying that's similar to following your heart is just be true to yourself, okay, very common saying. And in order to deal with this one, you really can't be true to yourself unless you answer three basic questions, okay? You can't be true to yourself until you know where you come from, okay? That's the first question of all questions. Where do you come from, okay? And then, of course, until you know where you come from, you can't answer the second question, who are you? And you can't answer the third question, what is your purpose? There was when I taught the youth here years ago, when I used to talk about this issue, the first question of where we come from, I kept saying, as a joke afterwards, I'd see him in the hallways, I'd say, who are you? I'd run up to him and say, who are you? And then Jonathan Berman eventually just kept, every time I saw him, he would run up to me, he said, who are you? And he would joke with me. And to this day, if I see him in public, if I see him at one time, he will do that to me. I saw him at Ellen and Paul's about 4 or 5 months ago, and the first thing he doesn't run up to me, he says, who are you? Okay, so he's got that in his head. Obviously, who are you? Anyway, not the song, Who Are You, by The Who, but who are you? Okay? So the question becomes, do we come from a creator, or are we a cosmic accident? As I said last time I was here, that is the question of all questions. That'll kick off everything else, being able to define who you are, okay? That is the question of all questions. Some people, the majority of people I run into mostly believe in a creator, but there are some people out there still believe we are an accident of nature. But, if you think about this contrast between Richard Dawkins and Genesis 1, Richard Dawkins is one of the staunch atheists of the last 30 years, but he says here, we are machines built by DNA whose purpose is to make more copies of the same DNA. This is exactly what we are for. We are machines for propagating DNA, and the propagation of DNA is a self-sustaining process. It is every living object's sole reason for living. And then compare that with Genesis 1. What a contrast. And God said, let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness. And of course, we're made in God's image. So that is a huge contrast, right, as far as where we come from and who we are. And I think the evidence is certainly with Genesis over Richard Dawkins. The culture says, the world says you must find yourself, be true to yourself, and express yourself, right? That's kind of the culture you live in today. You must find yourself, be true to yourself, and express yourself. When I was in my early 20s, I heard my mom, or she called me, said, well, Dad and I are just helping you find yourself. We're waiting, till you find yourself. Didn't your parents say that about you? Oh, Jeff, you got to go find yourself. You got to go find yourself. Still waiting. I don't know if they found themselves yet. Still trying, still working on it. And then when I became a believer at age 24, which was really in Beth Messiah, I was like, oh, I can't really find myself till I know who I am. And of course, now I know I'm made in the image of God. And then I read Yeshua's statement here in Matthew 16. He said, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his execution stake, and follow me. And I said, it's not about me, you see. It's not about starting with me. It's starting with Yeshua. I have to look to him, turn away from everything I want to do, which is perfectly like autonomy and everything, and I have to deny myself and follow him. That's how I find myself. Wow, that's kind of radical at that time. My first time I read it, I remember asking Howard about it. I was like, what's he talking about here? Like, what do I have to do? Deny myself? Can I not, go to a movie? Or what does this mean here? Can I not listen to my CDs? So Howard's like, just relax. Anyway, as he said it, I remember I called him. It's like, I've got 4,000 CDs sitting in my room here. I listen to them all day long. Some of them are not godly. He's like, just relax. We'll talk about that. But anyway, so the point is that, it comes to identity, we have to ask ourselves, what defines us, of course? This gets reiterated a lot in Beth Messiah, I know, but, is it being an image bearer of God something that's unchanging all the time? It's not shifting in any way. Finding our identity in Messiah is fulfilling our calling as an image bearer of God? Or is it, going to be in what we own, where we live, our career, our sexuality, our political position? Now, those things play a role, of course, but those things are shifting as well. So we constantly have to go back to really what should define us, which is being an image bearer of God, obviously, and our calling in Messiah, right? Okay, so let me talk about another one, which you're going to like this one. Don't judge, okay? As people say to me, don't judge. I say, why are you judging me for judging? Okay? Stop judging me for judging, all right? But this is a very, very common saying today. I met with a friend I grew up with from Bexley I'm from Bexley, I don't live there anymore, but I had lunch with a friend I grew up with about a month ago, and I was talking to him about where he is spiritually now, because I think his family had some religious background. He said, well, I don't judge anyone. I don't judge anything. I'm like, that's a judgment. So anyway, but my friend of mine, a well-known speaker, got this email from somebody about a couple months ago. This person emailed him and said, only God can judge me, and I'm a Christian lesbian and have been for almost 20 years. Stop judging and move on. I am so tired of you uptight, do-right sinners judging people. Now, of course, my friend could respond by saying the same thing. You're making a judgment by judging me, but anyway. But, it went to the famous text. They had to get into the famous text we all know from Matthew 7, okay? Because I think we probably know that most people, when they read this passage, they just read that first line, right? Do not judge, so you will not be judged. Or do not judge, lest you be judged, right? They don't read on right after that, okay? But read the entire thing. What's it say? Do not judge, so that you will not be judged. For in the way you judge, you will be judged. And by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your own eye, and look, the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly take the speck out of your brother's eye. Do not give what is holy to dogs, and not throw your pearls before pigs. They'll trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. Now, I have a confession to make. I grab my Bible here, sorry. When I was a new believer, and I just started reading the Gospels, I was kind of biblically illiterate. Just reading through them, just trying to understand them. And this is one of those verses that when I first looked at it, I was thinking to myself, what is Yeshua saying here? Is there like a literal like plank, in someone's eye, and I got to go up and do with the speck out of their eye? So then eventually I realized, okay, we got some hyperbole here. Okay, but it was a little weird to me at first reading that. But the point is that Yeshua is, he's not telling us not to judge, right? He's telling us how to judge correctly. Okay. And there's certainly a difference between making a judgment and being judgmental. No doubt about it, okay? So think about it. If Yeshua was saying to us never judge at all, don't say anything, that just wouldn't work in reality. He's saying don't judge anything, don't say anything ever, don't judge. Of course, you guys make hundreds, if not thousands of judgments every day, okay, all day long. So everybody makes judgments. But what Yeshua is saying for sure is that if you read that passage very clearly, is that he's saying that, okay, make sure that, you don't want to hold people to a standard that you're not meeting yourself, and you don't want to call out people on specific sins if you're doing the same thing, right? Or shortcomings that you're guilty of as well. So obviously that's not what we want to do. And, when you go back to that passage, we have to examine ourselves, right, before we even make any judgment, right? And, sometimes maybe we want to be self-righteous or look good, but we have to make sure that we're not holding people to that standard, that we're not meeting ourselves, okay? So that's what he's talking about, right? But he's not saying you can't make a judgment about anything. Like if I have a student that comes up to us at Ohio State, which they do all the time, and ask us about moral questions, moral issues, right? The sexuality issue, the abortion issue, or this moral issue. They say, what do you think of that? Well, I'm going to tell them what God says about it, okay? Because it's what his standard says, and I'm just communicating it to you. It's not me being judgmental if I say I think it's wrong. The reason I think it's wrong is because God says it's wrong, okay? And so you're being judgmental. No, I'm not. I'm communicating what God says, okay? You may not like what God says, but it's what he says, okay? Now let's look at a passage. Can we just look at something real quick in Matthew 23? I want to read something here that I couldn't put on a slide. It's too long. But let's look at Matthew 23 for a minute. I want to read something here. Now, when you go to Matthew 23, Yeshua this is one of those passages where, it's one of those passages over church history where, I don't know if you guys know this, but the Pharisees are kind of like the beating ground for a lot of Christians, right? Over church history, they've always been kind of like the beating ground. Like the Pharisees are bad, evil, hypocrites, judgmental, and Yeshua doesn't like them, okay? And so that's why it's good to read context and really learn a little more about the Pharisees. Okay, there's a lot more going on with the Pharisees. Yeshua probably had a lot in common more with the Pharisees than we think, okay? And it's not so much that, we just want to always, sadly, do what a lot of believers do, is just like bracket the Pharisees as as representing all the Jewish people. They were the Jewish leaders, along with there's some other sects there. But then Yeshua is dealing with the Pharisees in this passage. He's not wild about what they're doing. He's not happy. Some of their leaders are making some mistakes, and of course he's confronting them, as he does with us as well. But look what he says here in Matthew 23. It says, I'm not going to read all of them, I'm just going to read some of these. He says, Then Yeshua spoke to the crowds and disciples and saying, The scribes and the Pharisees have seated themselves in the chair of Moses. Therefore all they tell you to do and observe, but do not do according to their deeds, for they say things and do not do them. They tie up heavy burdens and lay them on men's shoulders. They themselves unwilling to move them, so much a finger. Go down, let's scroll down to, I'm not going to read all that. Go down to verse 13. These woe passages, we call them the woes in verse 13. It says here, But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you shut off the kingdom of heaven from people, and you do not enter in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you devour widows' houses, and for pretense you make long prayers, therefore you will receive greater condemnation. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you travel around on sea and land to make one proselyte. When he comes one, you make him twice as much a son of hell as yourselves. Woe to you, blind guides, and say, Whoever swears by the temple, that is nothing, and whoever swears by the gold of the temple is obligated. You fools and blind men, what is more important, the gold or the temple that sanctified the gold? And whoever swears by the altar, that is nothing, but whoever swears by the offering on that, he is obligated. You blind men, which is more important, the offering, the altar that sanctifies the offering? And then he goes down to verse 23. He says, Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, again. So notice these passages. He keeps, Yeshua's being, he's rebuking, okay? And like I said, you got to understand what's going on with the Pharisees. It's kind of like if Yeshua grabbed a bunch of pastors and put them in a stadium and got them together and rebuked them, for what they're doing. He's not happy with the leadership here, but it's not representing all the Jewish people. Like Yeshua doesn't like the Jewish people are saying. That's not what that's saying at all. But what's my point? My point is that we need to realize, I'm about to show you something, please don't take this personally, but Yeshua is not Barney, okay? He's not Barney the dinosaur, okay? He is, Yeshua could sometimes be not always as loving as we think he was. He spoke the truth in love, but he could be a bit of a drill sergeant sometimes here, like this passage. We know he got a little upset with them in the temple with the turning over the table. So, some people just don't have the correct view of Yeshua. They think he's kind of like a buddy, and he just approves and loves everything, okay? Yeshua does not approve everything, okay? Just like we don't approve every behavior, okay? As my children's behavior, your behavior, or my behavior, right? So we need to realize that. Now, there's another passage I want to mention, 1 Corinthians 5. That's a tough one, but it is about making judgments. Paul is dealing with a really delicate issue here in Corinth, and he says here that he talks about the issue of how to deal with this issue, but look what he says here in 1 Corinthians 5, 1-5. He says here, It's actually reported that among you there's sexual immorality, and such immorality as it not even among the pagans, that someone has his father's wife. And you are puffed up. Shouldn't you have mourned instead, so that the one who did this deed might be removed from among you? For even though I'm absent in body, I'm present in the spirit. I have already passed judgment on the one who has done this thing as though I were present. When you are gathered together in the name of our Lord Yeshua, I'm with you in spirit. With the power of our Lord Yeshua, you are to turn one such a fellow over to Satan for the destruction of his fleshly nature, so his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord Yeshua. Yikes. Okay? Can you imagine that today if we were in a congregation and someone walked up to you or someone else and said, we need to turn that person over to Yeshua for the destruction of his flesh, or turn that person over to Satan for the destruction of his flesh? You look at them like, that is judgmental. That is so judgmental. But see, what Paul's dealing with here is it's okay to make judgments and pursue church discipline. You know what I mean? That's what's going on here in this context. It's okay to do that. We have to do that as fellow believers, okay? He's saying that's fine, and he's doing that. But then he goes on in the verse, in the same chapter, and he says here, I wrote it to you not to mix together with sexually immoral people, not all meaning that sexually immoral people of this world are the greedy or the swindlers, idolaters, so then you would have to exit the world. For now I am writing to you not to mix with anyone who is being called a brother, if he is sexually immoral or greedy or an idolater or a slanderer or a drunkard or a swindler, not even to eat with such a fellow. But what business do I have judging outsiders? Don't you judge those who are on the inside, but those of the outside God judges. Put away the wicked fellow from among yourselves. So, is Paul saying here that since God judges the outsiders, are we allowed to pass judgment on the outsiders too, as believers? Or should we just focus on the insiders, okay, on our own community? Paul's definitely saying we need to focus on the insiders. We need to focus on our own community. But, and God definitely will deal with people on the outside. We can't hold them to a standard of what we believe, right? They don't know the Lord, just like I didn't, okay? But Paul is not saying, please, he's not saying that we can't ever say something's wrong out in the culture. Like if someone says to me, what do you think of transgender ideology? I think it's wrong. I think it's sin. I think it's destructive. I think it's destroying children's lives. I talk to college students. It's destroying their lives, okay? I can say that, but God is the one who will deal with them, okay? I'm not God. He will judge them, right? Okay? And that's what we need to understand. Sometimes people read this passage and they think, well, God judges the outsider, so I can't say anything ever. I can't say one thing. It's all God's thing. Yes, it is God's judgment. And actually, quite frankly, biblically, if you read Romans 1, the whole world's under judgment already. And Yeshua says in John 3, people are under judgment as well. So that's God's judgment, yes. But we do need to deal with people on the inside, in our own community. That's what Paul's saying. Of course, we do need to deal with our own sin and helping people to be accountable, and we do that through good accountability and loving relationships. Sure, we need to do that, absolutely, okay? That's why, as I reiterate here, Paul says he does not judge outsiders, since that is God's concern. Rather, he and the ecclesia with him are to judge those in the ecclesia, within the local community, right? And he quotes out of Deuteronomy, purge the evil person from among you. Notice he does this back here. By the way, in 1 Corinthians 5, what he's doing there, he's doing this to help the person, believe it or not. He wants them to come to repentance. He's doing it to help the community. Okay, he's doing what's best for them. Okay? Now, so this is why, when you think of a community, a local congregation, the goal of a local congregation is, yes, everybody's welcome. We don't want to be a community of judgment, but we are all inclusive in that everybody is welcome to come, no matter what your background is, right? No matter where you come from and what sin struggles you have. We all have sin issues, but the motto should be, yes, come as you are, but don't stay as you are, okay? So if someone comes to me, I'm not even a pastor of a local congregation, but if someone did come to me and says, I want you to affirm this specific behavior in my life that isn't biblical, I'd probably say, no. This place is a place of sanctification. See, it's about transformation, right? Everyone's welcome, but the goal is not to stay as you are, okay? That's the purpose of a local congregation, right? When it comes to making judgments, we want to avoid a couple things. We want to avoid self-righteous judgment, right? The example, like when you guys read in Luke 18, with the one Pharisee who was confident he was right standing with God because I'm not like the tax collectors and everything, and that's not what we want to be like. We don't want to be self-righteous. We also don't want to, have harsh judgment without grace, right? When we point something out, obviously it has to have grace, and Yeshua tells us in Matthew 7, we'll be judged by the way we're judged, by the way we judge people. Yeshua looks at how we handle that, okay? But one thing for sure is that we can avoid what we call, I would say, judgmentalism in a sense of a spirit of condemnation, towards fallen people. That's not the attitude we want to have, okay? We're all in the same boat as everybody at one stage of our lives before we came to know the Lord. But we are called to follow Yeshua's example, speak the truth in love, and be concerned for them, pray for them, and all of that. And as I said before, the they used to say there was one generation that led by the left foot and right foot analogy. One generation led with all truth. The left foot was all truth. Today, the right foot's like all love, right? We just go all love, all love, all love. Can't have one without the other. Got to integrate those together, truth and love together, okay? People are set free by the truth. And let me mention one last thing here about judgmentalism. If you haven't heard today, there's a thing called cancel culture, okay? Cancel culture has been going on a while, and what cancel culture is, it's an attitude where it seems that someone says something. Of course, this applies to a lot of online stuff you see. Of course, not many of us here are sports celebrities or in politics and stuff, but the point is that people are automatically canceled. If you say the wrong thing just slightly wrong or something, you can get punished, boycotted, lose your job, lose your status, lose your platform, everything. That's been happening for a while, right? We see that in many places. So cancel culture is incredibly judgmental, okay? There is no forgiveness in cancel culture. If you do something wrong, you're done. You are canceled, okay? And that's too bad because that's the opposite of what we believe as believers. But in some cases, in even believers' lives, I've seen this, that, friends cancel each other. Okay, we cancel each other and break relationships over different political views, social views, or moral issues. I've seen that happen the last 3 or 4 years, okay? Can't do that. Cannot do that as a believer. You have a higher calling, okay? Kingdom values transcend all other values, okay? Kingdom values transcend all other values. Yes, American values are here, Swiss values, Israel's values, German values. We have our cultural values, which some are good, but kingdom values transcend all that, okay? We have a higher calling to the kingdom, okay? And I have sharp disagreements with some people I know are believers. We have sharp disagreements, but I'm not going to cancel them, okay? They're still my brothers and sisters in the Lord. I may look at them and say, I don't know how you arrived at that conclusion. They may do the same to me, but I'm not going to cancel them, okay? And sometimes, we may have sharp disagreements. That's the way it is, okay? But in cancel culture, sadly, what we do is sometimes we elevate our positions over people, right? Because our identity is so wrapped up in that thing, that position, okay? In our identity, okay? And that's what the problem is. And probably the worst part of cancel culture, as I said, is that the traditional approach, which used to be that an apology, an atonement, and forgiveness was the way. It's no longer enough today, okay? What we do is we just cut them out, cancel them out. They're done, okay? That is not what we want to be doing in today's world. We need to set the example to people, right? That we do forgive. And yes, you may have said something I didn't like. Yes, you may have believed something I don't agree with, but I still accept you, and I still love you, okay? And, on a college campus, obviously, we hear a lot of things from people that are pretty weird sometimes, but I just know that people have different upbringings, different backgrounds, different biases, and this is all they know, and, we try to talk about those things. That's what has to happen. So I hope during these next few months, which we're a very heated election cycle, is we don't do this to each other, okay? Because I have seen this happen, all right? And I hope that doesn't happen with us. I hope we'll set the example, okay? So anyway, so I really do want to say that I hope some of these sayings have, you've heard some of these sayings maybe, and I hope that maybe you know how to respond to them. But I really hope you understand that we have a biblical approach that we can respond to these things, okay? Because these sayings are here, they're not going away, and I hope and pray that you guys can respond to these correctly. And at the very beginning, I just want to mention that I really, really, really can emphasize how much I do appreciate the prayers for what's going on campus, because there is a major work going on. I really do appreciate the prayers. We feel your prayers, and thank you so much. So, having said that, I think we've gone the max, 50 minutes today. Did I make it? Okay, last time went 40. I got to go 50 today. So, having said that, I'll just go ahead and close this out in a word of prayer. So, Lord,